In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, all praise be to Allah, the Lord of the universe, and peace and blessing be upon our Master and Prophet Muhammad and his pure household, and his noble companions, and all divine messengers. O God, hasten the arrival of Imam al-Mahdi and grant him good health and victory, and make us his followers and those who attest to his rightfulness. Mr. President, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I am grateful to the Almighty God who has granted me the opportunity to appear before this World Assembly once again. I wish to begin by commemorating those who lost their lives in the horrible flood in Pakistan and express my heartfelt sympathy with the families who lost their loved ones, as well as with the people and the government of Pakistan. I urge everyone to assist their fellow men and women as a humane duty. Allow me to thank His Excellency Mr. Ali Abdussalam Tareki, the President of the 64th session of the United Nations General Assembly, for all his efforts during his tenure. And I would also like to congratulate Mr. Joseph Tace, the President of the 65th session of the United Nations General Assembly, and wish him all success. Dear colleagues, in past years, I spoke to you about some hopes and concerns. Some concerns involve the crisis in families, the security challenge, disrespect for human dignity, the deterioration of world economy, climate change, and disregard for human aspirations to achieve justice and lasting peace. After about 100 years of domination, the capitalist system and existing world order are unable to provide appropriate solutions to the problems that society faces. Thus, their demise has arrived. Therefore, I shall try to examine several causes for their failure and picture features for an ideal order. The first cause relates to our attitudes and beliefs. As you are well aware, divine prophets had the mission to invite everyone to monotheism, to love and justice, and to show mankind the path to prosperity. They invite men to contemplation and to seek knowledge in order to better appreciate the truth and to refrain from atheism and egoism. The essence of the message of prophets is one and the same. Every messenger has endorsed the messenger before him and given glad tidings about the next prophet to come, who presented a more complete version of the religion in accordance with man's capacity at the time. This trend continued until the last messenger of God, who presented the perfection of an all-inclusive religion. In opposition to the call by the prophets, the egoists and greedy stood up against their clear call, revolting against their messages. Nimrod countered Hazrat Abraham. Pharaoh countered Hazrat Moses. And the greedy countered Hazrat Jesus Christ and Hazrat Muhammad. May peace be upon all our prophets. In the recent centuries, human ethics and values have been rejected as a cause for backwardness. They were even portrayed as opposing wisdom and science because The proclaimers of religion in the dark ages of the West inflicted man with backwardness. Therefore, man's disconnection from heaven has detached him from his true self. Man, with his potential to understand the secrets of the universe, his instinct to seek truth, his aspiration for justice and perfection, his quest for beauty and purity, and his capacity, as God has said, to represent him on earth, has been reduced to a creature restricted by the materialistic world, with a mission to maximize individualistic pleasures. Human instinct then replaced true human nature. Human beings and nations are considered rivals, and the happiness of an individual or a nation is upheld at the cost of others, to the point of even eliminating or suppressing others. Rather than developing a constructive and evolutionary method of cooperation, it was replaced by a destructive struggle for survival. The lust for capital and domination replaced monotheism, which is the gate to love and unity. This widespread clash of the egoist and with the divine values gave way to slavery and colonialism. A large part of the world came under the domination of a few Western states. Tens of millions of people were taken to slavery, and tens of millions of families were shattered. As a result, all the resources, the rights, and the cultures of the colonized nations were plundered. Lands were occupied, and indigenous people were humiliated and mass murdered. Yet nations rose up. Colonialism was alienated, and the independence of nations was recognized. Thus, the hope for respect, prosperity, and security was revived amongst nations. In the beginning of the past century, beautiful mottos of freedom, human rights, and democracy created hopes for healing the deep wounds of the past. Today, however, not only those dreams are not realized, but memories, even at times more bitter than before, have been recorded in our history. As a result of the two world wars, the occupation of Palestine, the Korean and the Vietnam wars, the Iraq war against Iran, the occupation of Afghanistan and Iraq, as well as many wars in Africa, hundreds of millions of people were killed, wounded, or displaced. Terrorism, illicit drug production, poverty, and the social gaps have increased. The dictatorial and coup d'etat governments in Latin America committed unprecedented crimes with the support of the West. Instead of disarmament, the proliferation and stockpiling of nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons expanded, placing the world under a larger threat. As a result, apparently, the very same old goals of colonialists and the slave masters were pursued, but this time around with a new facade. The second cause for the failure of the existing world order and capitalism has to do with the current global management and its ruling structures. The League of Nations and after that the United Nations were established with the promise to bring about peace, security, and the realization of human rights, which in fact meant a global management. One can analyze the current system of governance of world affairs by examining three events. The first is the event of the 11th September 2001, which has indeed affected the entire world for almost a decade. We recall that at the time, suddenly, the news of an attack on the Twin Towers was broadcast, using numerous footages of the incident. Almost all governments and known figures that mattered strongly condemned this incident. But then a propaganda machine came into full force. It was implied that the whole world was now exposed to a huge danger, namely that of terrorism, and that the only way to save the world would be to deploy forces into Afghanistan. Eventually, Afghanistan and shortly thereafter, Iraq were occupied. Now please take note. It was said that some 3,000 people were killed on September 11, for which we are all very saddened. Yet, up until now, in Afghanistan and Iraq, hundreds of thousands of people have been killed, millions wounded and displaced, and the conflict is still going on and expanding. In identifying those responsible behind the September 11 attacks, there were three viewpoints. First, that a very powerful and complex terrorist group able to successfully cross all layers of the American intelligence and security carried out the attack. This is the prevalent viewpoint, which has been supported mainly and advocated by American statesmen. Second, that some segments within the U.S. government orchestrated the attack to reverse the declining American economy and its grips on the Middle East in order to save the Zionist regime. The majority of the American people, as well as most nations and politicians around the world, agree with this view. Third, it was carried out by a terrorist group, but that the American government supported and took advantage of the situation. Apparently, this viewpoint has fewer proponents. The main evidence for this viewpoint links the incident with a few passports found in the huge volume of rubble and a video of an individual whose place of domicile was unknown, but it was announced that he had been involved in oil deals with some American officials. It was also covered up and said that due to the explosion and fire, no trace of suicide attackers was found. Regardless of each of these three viewpoints, there remain a few questions to be answered. First, would it not have been sensible that first a thorough investigation should have been conducted by independent groups to conclusively identify the elements involved in the attack and then map out a rational plan to take measures against them? Second, assuming the viewpoint of the American government, is it rational to launch a classic war through widespread deployment of troops that led to the death of hundreds of thousands of people to counter a terrorist group? Third, was it not possible to act the way Iran conducted the Rigi operations, fighting the Rigi terrorist group who killed and wounded 400 innocent people? In the Iranian operation, no innocent person was harmed. It is proposed that the United Nations set up an independent fact-finding group for the event of September 11, so that in the future, expressing views about it, to ensure that the different views about it are not banned from discussion in the future. I wish to announce here that next year the Islamic Republic of Iran will host a conference to study terrorism and the means to confront it. I invite officials, scholars, thinkers, researchers, and research institutes of all countries to attend this conference. The second cause for the demise of the existing world order is the occupation of the Palestinian territories. The oppressed people of Palestine have lived under the rule of an occupying regime for 60 years, been deprived of freedom, security, and the right to self-determination, while the occupiers are given recognition. On a daily basis, the houses are being destroyed over the heads of innocent women and children. People are deprived of water, food, and medicine in their own homeland. The Zionists have imposed 5 all-out wars on their neighboring countries and on the Palestinian people. The Zionists committed the most horrible crimes against the defenseless people in the wars against Lebanon and Gaza. The Zionist regime attacked a humanitarian flotilla in a blatant defiance of all international norms and kills civilians. This regime, which enjoys the absolute support of some Western countries, regularly threatens the countries in the region and continues publicly to announce the assassination of Palestinian figures, while Palestinian defenders and those opposing this regime are pressured, labeled as terrorists, and called anti-Semites. All values, even that of the freedom of expression, which in Europe and the United States seem to matter so much and are so important, have been sacrificed at the altar of Zionism. Solutions are doomed to fail because the right of the Palestinian people is not taken into account. Would we have witnessed such horrendous crimes if instead of recognizing the occupation, the sovereign right of the Palestinian people had been recognized? Our unambiguous proposition is the return of the Palestinian refugees to their homeland and the reference to the vote of the people of Palestine, all Palestinians, to exercise their sovereignty and decide on the type of government. The third cause for the demise of the existing order has to do with the outlook on nuclear energy. Nuclear energy is clean and cheap and a heavenly gift, which is amongst the most suitable alternatives to cut pollutions emanating from fossil fuels. The Non-Proliferation Treaty allows all member states to use nuclear energy without limit, and the International Atomic Energy Agency is mandated to provide member states with technical and legal support. The nuclear bomb is the worst inhumane weapon and one which must totally be eliminated. The NPT prohibits its development and stockpiling and calls for nuclear disarmament. Nonetheless, please note that some of the permanent members of the Security Council and nuclear powers, i.e. those who hold the nuclear bomb, have resorted to a measure. They have equated nuclear energy with the nuclear bomb and have distanced this energy from the reach of most nations by establishing monopolies and pressuring the IAEA, while at the same time they have continued to maintain, expand, and upgrade their own nuclear arsenals. You may have heard that in the current year, the United States administration has asked for $80 billion to upkeep its nuclear bombs alone. This has entailed the following. Not only the nuclear disarmament has not been realized, but also nuclear bombs have been proliferated in some regions, including by the occupying and intimidating the Zionist regime. I would like here to propose that the year 2011 be proclaimed the year of nuclear disarmament and nuclear energy for all, nuclear weapons for none. In all these cases, of course, I admit that the United Nations has been unable to take any effective course of action that has been viable or meaningfully viable. Unfortunately, in the decade proclaimed by it as the International Decade for the Culture of Peace, for example, hundreds of thousands were killed and injured as a result of war, aggression and occupation, and hostilities and antagonism have increased. Ladies and gentlemen, very recently the world witnessed an abhorrent an inhumane act of burning the Holy Quran. The Holy Quran is the divine book and the eternal miracle of the Prophet of Islam. It calls for worshipping the one God, justice, compassion toward people, development and progress, reflection and thought, defense of the oppressed and resistance against oppressors, and it names with respect the previous messengers of God, like Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Joseph, Moses, and Jesus Christ, may peace be upon all the prophets, and endorses them. They burned the Quran to burn all these truths and good judgments. However, the truth cannot be burned. Quran is eternal, because God and truth are everlasting. This act, and any other act which widens the gap and distances between nations, is evil. We must wisely avoid playing into the hands of Satan. On behalf of the Iranian nation, I pay respect to all divine books and their followers. This is the Quran, and this is the Bible. We pay respect to both books, as both are dear to us. Dear friends, esteemed friends, for years, the inefficiency of capitalism and the existing world management structures have been exposed enough for us to understand what they mean. And the majority of states and people have begun a quest for fundamental changes and for allow justice in global relations to prevail. The cause for the United Nations ineptitude is its unjust structure. Major powers have monopolized the Security Council due to their veto privilege and sidelined the General Assembly, which is the main pillar of the organization. In the past several decades, at least one of the permanent members of the Security Council has always been a party to a conflict. When both the judge and the defender or prosecutor and the defender are on the same side of the conflict, how can you expect justice? They feel immune as a result of the aggressions due to the structure of the United Nations. For example, if Iran enjoyed the veto privilege, would the Security Council and the IAEA Director General have taken the same position on its nuclear issue as they have today? Dear friends, the United Nations is the key center for coordinating common global management. Its structure needs to be reformed in a manner that all independent states and nations are able to participate in the global governance and actively and constructively. The veto privilege should be revoked, and the General Assembly should be the highest body, and the Secretary General should be the most independent official, and all his positions and activities should be taken with approval of the General Assembly and should be directed towards promoting justice and eliminating discrimination in the world order. The Secretary General should not come under pressure from powers and or the country hosting the organization, that is the United Nations, for stating the truth and administering justice. It is proposed that the General Assembly hold within a year and in the framework of an extraordinary session finalize the reformation of this body's structure, the United Nations structure, that is. The Islamic Republic of Iran has clear proposals in this regard and suggestions and stands ready to participate actively and constructively in the process. Ladies and gentlemen, I announce clearly that the occupation of other countries under the pretext of freedom and democracy is an unforgivable crime. The world needs the logic of compassion and justice and inclusive participation instead of the logic of force, domination, unilateralism, war, and humiliation. The world needs to be governed by virtuous people like the divine prophets. The two vast geographical spheres, namely Africa and Latin America, have gone through historic developments during the past decade that have altered their fates. The new approaches in these two continents, which are based on increasing level of integration and unity, as well as on localizing the growth and development models, have borne considerable fruit to the people of those regions. The awareness and wisdom of the leaders of these two continents has overcome the regional problems and crises without and free of the domineering interference of non-regional powers. The Islamic Republic of Iran has expanded its relations with Latin America and Africa in all aspects in recent years. And about the glorious Iran. The Tehran Declaration was a hugely constructive step in confidence-building efforts, which was made possible through the admirable goodwill by the governments of Brazil and Turkey, along with the close and sincere and honest cooperation of the Iranian government. Although the declaration received inappropriate reactions by some Western powers, and was followed by an unlawful resolution, it still holds valid. We have observed the regulations of the IAEA more than our commitments, yet we have never submitted to illegally impose pressures, nor will we ever do so. It has been said that they seek to pressure Iran into a dialogue. Well, firstly, Iran has always been ready for a dialogue based on respect and justice. Secondly, the methods based on disrespecting nations have long become ineffective. Those who have used intimidation and sanctions in response to the clear logic of the Iranian nation are in real terms destroying the remaining credibility of the Security Council and the trust of nations for this body, proving once and again how unjust is the function of the Council. When they threaten a great nation, a great people such as Iran, which is known throughout history for its scientists, poets, artists, and philosophers, and whose culture and civilization is synonymous to purity, submission to God, and seeking justice, how can they ever expect that other nations have confidence in them? My friends, it goes without saying that domineering methods in managing the world, and namely capitalism, have failed. Not only has the era of slavery and colonialism and domineering the world passed, the path to the revival of old empires are now blocked as well. We have announced that we stand ready for a serious and free debate with the American statesmen to express our transparent views on issues of importance to the world in this very venue. It is proposed right here that in order to have a constructive dialogue, an annual free debate be organized within the General Assembly. In conclusion, dear colleagues and friends, the Iranian nation and the majority of the world's nations and governments are opposed to the current discriminatory management of the world. This inhumane nature of management has put it at a dead end and requires a major overhaul. Reforming the world's affairs and bringing about tranquility and prosperity requires the participation of all, pure thought, and the divine and human management that we have been given. We are all of the idea and view that justice is the basic element for peace, durable security, and the spread of love among peoples and nations. It is in justice that mankind seeks the realization of his aspirations, rights, and dignity, since he is weary of oppression, humiliation, and ill treatment. The true nature of mankind is manifested in the love for other fellow humans and the love for all good in the world. Love is the best foundation for establishing relations amongst people and amongst nations. As Vahshi Baqi, the great Iranian poet, says, quote, "From the fountain of youth, drink 1,000 sips. You'll still die if you don't have love's grip," unquote. In making a world full of purity, safety, and prosperity, people are not rivals but companions. Those who seek their happiness but in the sorrow of others, and their welfare and safety but in others' insecurity, those who see themselves superior to others, are out of the path of humanity and are in evil's course. The economy and materialistic means are only tools, some tools, to serve others, to create friendship and strengthen human connections for spiritual perfection. They are not tools for show-off or means of dominating others. Men and women complement each other and family units with pure, loving, and long-lasting relations of the spouses, which becomes the center and the guarantee for the continuity and the bringing up of generations, for true pleasure, for spreading true love, and for reforming societies. The woman is a reflection of God's beauty and is the source of love and care. She is the guardian of purity and exquisiteness of society. The tendency to toughen the soul and behavior of women deprives them from their very basic right of being a loving mother and a caring wife. It would result in a more violent society with irreversible defects. Freedom is a divine right that should serve peace and human perfection. Dear colleagues, pure thoughts and the will of the righteous are keys to the gates of a pure life full of hope, liveliness, and beauty. This is the promise of God, that the earth will be inherited by the pure and the righteous, and the people free from selfishness will take up the management of the world. Then there will be no trace of sorrow, discrimination, poverty, insecurity, and aggression. The time for true happiness and for the blossoming of the true nature of humankind, the way God has intended, will arrive. All those seeking justice and all the free spirits have been waiting for this moment and have been promised such glorious times. The complete human, the true servant of God and the true friend of mankind, whose father was from the generation of the beloved prophet of Islam and whose mother was from the true believers of the Jesus Christ, shall wait along with Jesus, the Son of Mary, and the other righteous to appear on those brilliant days and assist humanity in welcoming them. We should join ranks and seek justice as would be befitting of men. Praise to love and worship. Praise to justice and freedom. Praise to the true humanity, the complete human, the true companion of humankind, and peace be upon you and all the righteous and the pure. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Thank you very much.